If you're one of the millions of women out there who struggles with urinary incontinence or frequent pee leaks, or if you've got chronic constipation or digestive issues, or maybe you've got lower back or pelvic pain that never seems to go away, or if you're a man and you've got prostate problems or erectile dysfunction, then you are going to love this episode. Because I brought in a pelvic floor expert and best-selling author to talk about one of the most common contributors to all of those things, as well as some simple steps that you can be taking to get those problems to go away and never come back. Let's get into this. Welcome, Jana Danielson. What I would love for you to start with is why so many people nowadays have pelvic floor dysfunction. I mean, it's fairly obvious to me why 50% of women who have given birth have it, but why do 16% of men have pelvic floor dysfunction?
Mm-hmm. You know, I wish there was some big dramatic reason that, we're starting to see more and more pelvic floor dysfunction in both men and women, Yoni, but it really comes down to, this is what it comes down to. It comes down to our breath and our posture and how we move, this vessel that we've been gifted to live in on this earth. It's really as simple as that. And so when people understand that the pelvic floor is actually a part of our core. So anatomically, I think when most people hear the word core, or I need to strengthen my core, they think about getting down on the floor and doing abdominal crunches or doing planks, right, to work their core. But if you think about an apple, you eat an apple and what's left is the core. That core is a cylinder. It has a top and a bottom, and it has, the part that you ate the fruit. Our core in our body is exactly like that. The diaphragm essentially is the roof of the core. The pelvic floor is the floor of the core. And then the abdominals that start with that, the six pack, the rectus abs, through to the internal and external obliques, and then to the inner transverse abdominis, that is truly what makes up our core. So here's the deal. When we don't breathe properly, a lot of us, I call a lot of the people that I work with in my community, my little goldfish, because they breathe with their gills. They breathe with secondary breathing muscles, sternocleidomastoids and scalenes, and they don't use this big diaphragm that lives in our ribs. It's like a big dome, like a big mushroom cap. So much pelvic floor dysfunction occurs because we're not breathing properly. We're holding our breath. We don't use that diaphragm to really pump air in and out. And when the diaphragm is not moving, it's like the pelvic floor is taking cues from that muscle above it. Like, okay, if that muscle's not really doing much, I guess I really don't have to do much. And it kind of just sits there, stagnates. And usually when muscle is not used, it becomes dysfunctional. So that's the first part of it, is breathing. All right. The second part goes into our posture. We don't move like our ancestors did in a day. We don't have to go and walk for our water. We don't have to go and gather our food or, hunt for supper. We don't do that, right? Sometimes we just get on our phone and and it arrives at our door, right? We are a sedentary population. And when you think about it, we can be in a seated position up to even 20 hours a day if you're at work sitting, driving. And if you are a side sleeper and you sleep with your knees bent, just think about that. You're seated just 90 degrees over, right? So we have these perpetual positions that our body just adapts to, right? We're very adaptable that way. And we don't realize that because of our lack of breathing, because of our poor postural habits, and then because a lot of us subscribe to moving in these big major ways, bigger is better. It's kind of like that 1980s fitness, just a lot of the themes, right? We're bigger, harder, faster, stronger. And I feel like those three, almost like a trifecta, those three together are what is the culprit behind a lot of today's pelvic floor dysfunction.
Very interesting. So we're talking about two issues there that are like disuse type issues where breathing incorrectly, stress breathing, and not getting into that parasympathetic belly breathing situation that kids do naturally, by the way, and then just disuse from sedentary living, and then now you're talking about the postural issue, which is being in a flexion-based position for hours and hours each day. And then this third one, which is super interesting, is activity patterns that are focused on, you called it big movements. Can you go into that a little deeper?
Yeah. So how many of us have scrolled through our Instagram feed, and especially, you know, coming up, we're going to have the holidays coming up, and then there's going to be the new year, and we're going to see all these 21-day fill in the blank, right? And we become a society that's we want the immediacy of the results. So the brain is like, ooh, if I do this for 3 weeks, if I do the bigger movements, the harder movements, that's what my body, you know, my body will, I'll leapfrog, I'll jumpstart, right? And I see it often in my community that there's that Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare. And so many of us want to be the hare. We want to like get off of the starting gate and we want to just go, right? The true winner in that race, we all know how that story ends, right? It's the tortoise that is like steady, consistent, building momentum one step at a time. And so my own health journey, which included almost a 2-year the trajectory of my digestive pain was that it wasn't until I actually found Pilates, learned how to breathe properly, learned how to improve my posture, and learned that the health of my spine truly dictated the health of my body, right? I was one of those boot campers, marathon runners, and I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I got a good adrenaline hit from those activities. And it wasn't until I realized that I needed to not be like, you know, it's like a 2-year-old having a temper tantrum. I had to be super quiet with my movements, go inside a little bit. And once I started healing from the inside, the outside completely followed suit with that.
That brings up an interesting point, which is a lot of people think that they understand pelvic floor dysfunction, but you just mentioned your own pain journey. And the thing that you brought up was digestive problems.
So I think so many people think that pelvic floor dysfunction starts and ends with incontinence.
Yeah.
All right. Like that's what we think. Well, I don't pee my pants when I cough or sneeze or laugh out loud, so I don't have pelvic floor issues. Oh, okay. But do you often experience constipation? Do you often experience bloating? Do you have chronically tight hips or that low-grade back pain that just won't go away? What about cold, tingly feet? How do you live with that? I like to even mention children in their like 9, 10, 11-year-old kids that are bedwetters. When all other boxes have been checked, I've helped so many parents with their kids because their little pelvic floors are so tight that is the root cause of their bedwetting. You know, men with erectile dysfunction, like really the list goes on. And when you think about the location of the pelvic floor, right? It's like the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. It's the bridge between the right and left side of our body and the front and the back, right? From how these 14 little muscles that create this beautiful hammock. And it's important. I've talked to so many men that are like, I'm so glad I don't have pelvic floor stuff. We can't have babies, therefore we don't have a pelvic floor. And I'm like, oh no, sir. Men actually do have pelvic floors. And think about habits that men have. I think of my dad. He wore his wallet in his right back pocket for his whole life, probably still does, right? What does that do to the alignment of our pelvis? Our bones become out of alignment. What do you think is going to happen to the soft tissue, the ligaments, the muscles, the fascia? They're going to follow suit. So oftentimes dysfunction doesn't have to be some sort of traumatic experience or childbirth or a motor vehicle accident or prostate cancer. It can often be like these subtle habits that are just part of our life that all of a sudden you're like, why can't I deal with this back pain? Or why is my sciatica flaring? I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to do. So I think that I like to help people understand that it's not just, waking up at night to go to the bathroom, or like I said, not being able to jump on the trampoline with your kids because you might pee a little bit. Pelvic floor dysfunction goes much broader than that.
I think you just got a lot of people's attention there with the mention of erectile dysfunction, which I think is not often mentioned in relationship to pelvic floor dysfunction. Can you
No.
explain the bridge between those two?
Yeah. Again, it's quite simple. So the pelvic floor in a man's body, many men are hypertonic. Okay. And hypertonic means if you gave your kids sugar, they'd be hyper, jumping, bouncing off the walls. A hypertone, a muscle with hypertone has too much tone. It's too tight. Well, you can't strengthen a tight muscle. So for a lot of guys, and if they're athletes as well, they can get a lot of pelvic floor tightness simply from their training. If they sit at a desk,
Sure.
cyclists, all of that, right? There can be a lot of squeezing, of holding unbeknownst to them. So what happens is the pelvic floor becomes like that brick wall, and blood flow to the penis literally becomes blocked. And so men often feel like the only fix is to go to the doctor, get a prescription. So they get their prescription for their Viagra or whatever drug it is. And what's in that little pill is actually lab produced nitric oxide. And that's why for a lot of guys, they'll take their Viagra or whatever pill they're using, and it'll be like 8 hours later and they still have this erection because there's this high dose of nitric oxide. Well, guess what, guys? Your body creates that on its own. When you learn how to breathe properly with your diaphragm, in through your nose and out through your mouth, that action actually triggers the creation of nitric oxide in your body. So you couple this tight pelvic floor. Now guys feel the solution is this little pill. And in fact, what is needed in most cases is pelvic floor physiotherapy. So there's a specialty in physiotherapy where it's pelvic floor focused. For women, it is vaginally, and for men, it's anally, because that literally is the only way in. 1 or 2 sessions of pelvic floor physiotherapy to help release, stuck trigger points can literally work wonders for a guy. And then again, it comes back to posture, that hunched over posture, that tech neck, we call it these days. We eliminate blood flow, like our circulation gets negatively impacted. So once we learn how to release, open up, it really does go a long way to starting to reverse that pattern of the holding and the tightness that for a lot of men is truly the root cause of their erectile dysfunction.
What's typically talked about with PT or corrective exercises for pelvic floor is activation of this tissue, which always made sense to me in the past because pelvic floor dysfunction is so prevalent among women who have given birth. You're talking about like 50% of them, which always made sense to me, stretching the tissues for months at a time. And it would make sense that you need to turn those tissues back on. But there's this whole other element that I would love for you to get into, which is the body's response to instability and or feeling unsafe, which is a tensioning response. I explain it to my patients in a very extreme way, which is if you're being attacked by a bear, what do? The natural response is to go into a fetal position. And that's what we do in stressful situations instinctually. And it's based on contraction of flexion-based muscles. And so I can understand how after giving birth, the body would tense all of the surrounding muscles to try and restore stability to our critical foundation in the center of our body that literally holds us together. And so talk a little bit about that response of the body needing to feel safe.
Yeah, for sure. So the body is it's the way we move in a day. It's this beautiful dance between mobility and stability. All right. So I am from Canada. For 5 months out of the year, we are like Arctic tundra. So I'm going to use this as an example. If you're walking across an icy parking lot, you forget that your toes have curled, your butt's probably squeezed a little bit. You might be taking these small little shifts because all of a sudden your environment is very unstable. Your body knows instinctively, I need to add more stability. So I'm not going to take a full stride. Even if you're walking across, loose gravel, or you've gone on a hike, you're not just going to be walking the same way you would if you were walking down a sidewalk that has lots of stability under you. It's the same. The body's always searching for this beautiful equilibrium. How much holding and how much moving do I need to create for this person to safely do this exercise and or this movement or whatever it might be? So that's rooted in our nervous system. So we have this sympathetic part of our nervous system, which is the fight, flight, freeze. And then we've got the parasympathetic, which is that rest, digest, just it's the yin and the yang. And so when we are constantly in fight or flight, or we think that there is that, and that bear, it doesn't have to physically be a bear. It could be deadlines at work. It could be conflict with your spouse. It could be challenges with your kids. Yeah. You might have that symbolic bear chasing you for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yeah, or it could even be a little bear, which is your dad's wallet in his back pocket.
Exactly. And so the body is meant to respond to those moments of stress. And then it's meant to go back to its equilibrium, right? The parasympathetic takes over. And so when we are, and then we kind of get used to that level of, I'm swimming across the water and the water is up to my chin, but I'm used to that. Oh, okay. The water's now past my lips, but I'm used to that. We're really good at that. And for some people, it's this almost like this toxic, they get, their ego gets fed by how much more can I load on my plate? All the while, you don't realize what it's doing physiologically to your body. The holding, the stress, the tension, and all the muscles interact with each other. So you have this beautiful bowl, your pelvic floor. Then you have your first energy center. Some people refer to it as the root chakra. That is your safety. That is your groundedness to Mama Earth. That is located in the pelvic floor. So if we are not feeling safe and grounded, and we just don't know, like we can't, we're super indecisive, we just don't feel settled, that's the energetics of the pelvic floor. I always talk to my community about, you have the physicality of it, right? But then there's this energetic or emotionality of it that you might not even realize is going on. So our pelvic floor is good at being a sponge for emotion. Our psoas muscle, we have two of them, the only muscles in the body that attach the legs to our spine. The pelvic floor and the psoas are really good friends, right? That fetal position, they are good at helping us get there. And then we have all these nerve structures, right, that are sending communication like, she's safe, she's not safe, she's safe, she's not safe. And in my case, my pain was digestive in nature. I did every test. I was told at the end of my journey, before I found Pilates, that the pain was in my head and I was seeking attention. My doctor told me that. But by that time, my body was in a state of chronic pain. I had pelvic floor pain. I had headaches. I looked years older than I should. I wasn't moving great. I wasn't sleeping great. And so it's this, we need to get past thinking about the body as these pieces. We really are truly systems that impact each other. And that's why it's important to understand that this pelvic floor dysfunction can be needing more support, or not only needing more support, more strength, but also needing that a little more relaxed. What is the resting state?
Yeah, very interesting. Here's a classic example from my life that ties directly into what you were just talking about. So I have a 1-year-old. He started walking. He's 1 in 3 months. He started walking right at 1. And we put him in shoes for the first time. We had gone to a place where the ground was not safe to walk on in bare feet. And we put him in shoes for the first time ever just a week ago. And as soon as we put the shoes on his feet, his nervous system sent a signal to his brain that you're unsafe, and he immediately went back to crawling. So my son still grips the floor with his toes when he walks, because he's still getting it, he's still trying to get stable. And so he's using everything to prevent himself from falling. Happens naturally. He's not thinking about it. But as soon as we took his ability to grip the floor and we took the proprioception away from his feet, his body went, you are unsafe. And he immediately went back to crawling.
That blows my mind. I did some work with an osteopath from New Zealand, Dr. Philip Beach, and he would never call shoes, but he referred to them as sensory deprivation chambers.
Yeah, smart.
Right?
I interviewed a guy who runs one of the biggest barefoot shoe companies in the United States, and he calls modern day footwear, he says it makes your feet numb and dumb.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me when I get to talk to experts about different areas of the body, and they're all drawing the exact same conclusions.
Yeah.
So I interviewed a woman who's she's got more initials after her name than an alphabet soup, but she's the world's foremost expert on lower extremity biomechanics, and she literally said that you could cure the vast majority of modern day foot problems just by getting people to walk barefoot.
Agreed. And, going back to posture, so you don't have to be a mechanic or a structural engineer to understand what big bones versus little bones are meant for, right? Little bones, think of our hands, our feet, our spine, like movement. Think of long bones, the femur in our leg, like long bones meant for holding, meant for strength. And so if we were to look at the foot, right, the 26 bones in each foot, and we were to look just at, the bony structure, we have that great big calcaneus at the back, our heel bone. And then we have 25 other small little odd shaped bones that go through the mid and the forefoot. Most people actually stand with about 80% of their weight in their forefoot on those little bones. So what do you think it's telling the brain? The brain's like, hey, wait a minute. I thought little bones were for movement, but now this body is loading those bones to bear weight. And that big heel bone at the back is like, hey guys, give me some work, right? And so what I've learned through all my training is that optimal posture optimal weight distribution through the feet is about 60% of your weight in that heel bone and about 40% across the widest part of your foot, the metatarsals, right? Now we're loading the bones properly, which then sends, the forces of, the earth coming up through our body and gravity coming down. Now, all of a sudden, we have a structure that is optimized to manage those forces, which includes the pelvic floor, the diaphragm, the glottis, like all of these areas of our body that are meant to be, it's like weather systems, high pressure, low pressure. If we're standing with too much weight forward on our toes, that changes how our quads are holding. That turns off our glutes and our hamstrings. It puts more, force on our low back. And the pelvic floor is like, can somebody help me here? I don't know. It doesn't feel right. And it's going to hold on tighter so you don't fall forward. So, we can talk about any part of the body, any system of the body, and we can always find a path back to the pelvic floor. And that's why I'm so grateful that you allowed me to come and have this chat with you today, because I don't think a lot of people, the pelvic floor, we don't see it like we do a bicep or, a deltoid or our glutes. We don't see it physically.
Yeah.
And so it's very easily just overlooked.
Yeah. I had a conversation years ago when I was very intensely into strength training, and I was squatting and deadlifting loads that were very heavy for me, double or 2.5 times my body weight. And the act of repetitiously doing abduction, adduction on a 2-legged movement actually ended up creating some problems for me in that region. And it wasn't until I went into lunge type movements and Bulgarian split squats, where you're separating front and back, that I was able to properly rehab that. And now I'm to the point in my mid 40s where the training that I do for strength for my legs is exclusively split squat type movements that are opening that tissue, forcing it to go through a full range of motion and then contract back safely. But I'm able to move still heavy loads, but the difference in weight on the spine, the difference in training the body symmetrically one side at a time makes a world of difference in terms of my ability to be athletic and run around and play with my kids, rather than to just super heavy loads all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, and that's a really great example of just, you know, the way the evolution of the way we think about our body is important, right? Because if we buy into these belief systems that if you've had a baby, you'll be you have a lifetime membership to the P Club. For guys, if you have erectile dysfunction, that's for the rest of your life. If you've had prostate cancer, well, get ready to be, wearing adult diapers. Like, no, no, and no, because if the body is properly educated, and people need to understand Rome was not built in a day. So it takes time to rewire. But if people have the right information and the right time frame, a realistic time frame, the body is brilliant. Like you said earlier, like watch a newborn baby breathe. Their belly rises and lowers. They are the best. They are the most amazing diaphragmatic breathers. It's like Joe Pilates, the creator of Pilates, said, breath is the first and the last act of life, and somewhere in the middle, we just forget how to do it. So if we come back to the basics of breathing, hydration, good food, good movement, good sleep, you kind of got all the tools in your toolbox that you need to improve.
Yeah, it's fascinating. One of your fellow countrymen has a quote that I love, Dr. Stuart McGill. He said that what you don't do is often more important than what you do. So it's kind of like what you were saying, we come in perfect and somewhere along the way, we find creative ways to mess ourselves up.
Yeah.
I want to get back to something that you said earlier. You tied it to your father wearing his wallet in his back pocket. Now, one of the things that I've seen in over 17-year clinical practice is that pelvic torque in people who have symmetrical limb length in their lower body is rampant. So you're talking, in my clinical practice, somewhere to the tune of, and this was a clinical practice that focused exclusively on people with chronic pain, but you're talking about 95% of the people who came through my door had an obvious pelvic torque. Are you familiar with the term?
Well, why don't you give me your definition of it?
Sure. So, it'll make sense to you. Maybe you're just using a different word. I'm sure you've seen it. The pelvic bowl, sacrum in the middle, sacroiliac joint, pubic symphysis on the front, pelvic floor sits in the bottom of that bowl, as you described it. Diaphragm sits in the bottom of the rib cage. They rebound energy into each other. When we start getting into an anterior pelvic tilt like so, and the rib cage elevates like so, we get what I call energy leaks, where the energy from the pelvic floor shoots out and the energy from the diaphragm shoots in the wrong direction. They're supposed to be rebounding into each other to stabilize that cylinder that you talked about earlier.
Love that.
When we talk about pelvic torque, we talk about one of the iliums typically goes this direction. The other one typically goes this direction. Sacrum, sandwiched in the middle, goes for a ride, and pubic symphysis is altered. Now, I hadn't given much thought to what happens to the pelvic floor as a result of that, but I have seen over and over and over again throughout the years of clinical practice that when you normalize the pelvis, that alone can make an instantaneous difference in the person's digestion and elimination.
See, that is so cool to me, because I used to own an integrated health therapies clinic and Pilates studio. And so I had a physiotherapy team, and one of my practitioners had a pelvic floor specialty. So I would go for my regular check-ins. And for me, so when I was like 6 years old, I had osteomyelitis in my left hip. It was very aggressive. Doctors had a hard time finding the right antibiotic. My mom and dad were actually told that if it went on much longer, I probably would live my life in a wheelchair. Thank goodness they found the right antibiotic. Hence, fast forward all these years, and I'll be 50 at the end of this year. When I would go in for my pelvic floor physiotherapy, and not because it just was part of my wellness routine, right? my therapist would always, I would have constantly these like pressure points or trigger points on the left side of the pelvic bowl. Right side, nothing, right? So she'd go in, and she would, she would release them, and it didn't feel awesome. And I didn't realize that how tight I was on that left side. And then we got into some really more advanced pelvic floor work, think about bringing, the sacrum to the pubic bone, or think about just folding at that left hand, the left hand side of your pelvis, where your pelvic floor over. And once I got really good at feeling that piece, I could work like the quadrants of my pelvic floor almost separately from each other. Like it was so nuanced. And what you're talking about, like that was when I was 6, right? And I think of all the people that see you or see colleagues of ours that maybe don't connect the dots between, that dirt bike accident, or, that hit in football once, or that fall as a figure skater that, leave its mark on us. And because the pelvic floor, like I said, is geographically located where it is, it is managing the the stuff that's coming from above and the stuff that's coming up from below. And so this, the torque that you're talking about, and I even see it in my kids. I've got 2 college golfers in my family, and I am, they're not as grateful yet, but they will be, that they have a mom that, does what she does, because I'm seeing kids that they're playing with. You can even see when they're standing, like they're completely asymmetrical. They've got one, and the body wants to be balanced, right? So they've got the one shoulder, but then the other hip is trying its hardest. And that torque is happening, just like I said, unbeknownst to these bodies.
Yeah, it's amazing that I never found, I'm still searching for an explanation as to why the pelvic torque is rampant. There's definitely things that contribute to it. You mentioned one, your dad with the wallet, the way that people cross their legs, because they typically go one side over the other. And if you ask them to do the opposite side, it's very weird for them.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a cause or an effect. There's definitely a sidedness. If you ask somebody to kick a ball, they will have a preference as to which side they kick with. We're both in Mexico right now. If you have somebody surf, they have one, or snowboard, one foot, they're going to be comfortable forward. The other foot has to be back. Very few people are equally comfortable on both sides. If you watch people walk or run, and really carefully, you'll see that stride length is often different from one side to the next.
Yeah.
So you see all of these things, and I don't have an explanation as to why it happens.
Do you also think, though, Yoni, that it's partially like going back to like life, like moments in life? I would see a lot of people in my studio and clinic that had that sprained ankle 15 years ago that never actually, it healed, but not through good movement rehabilitation. So they're going through life, but then I see them on a mat doing a certain Pilates exercise, and there's like, almost hypermobility on one side, and then, the opposite on the other. Like, I think compensatory patterns. I had a friend about 10 years ago that wrote an article about Tiger Woods, and she believed that all of his back issues stemmed from a 3rd-degree left ankle sprain he had when he was 14 years old. That it went from ankle on the left to knee issues on the right to hip issues on, like it just kind of went tic-tac-toe, hip issues on the left, and then settled into his thoracic spine. So it was a really interesting, theory on the compensatory patterns that our body is just so good at covering.
I think that could play a part. I also worry because a lot of physical therapists, manual therapists, chiropractors say that as a very almost flippant explanation for stuff, because you can easily say that, and I'm not denying it, because it's certainly the case with some people. But my son had a pelvic torque, and he's only been walking for 3 months.
Interesting.
And here's the other thing. is I've done direct pelvic work, admittedly without getting the history of every injury a person has ever had over a lifespan that spans multiple decades. And I've seen pelvic torque correct with direct work. So I'm not denying that cumulative trauma and compensatory patterns could play a part for many people. But I do worry that I don't want to write things off that easily.
Yep, that's fair. That's fair. What do you think? Can I ask you a question just around your son?
Sure.
Do you guys use those little bunny hug things that they strap on the baby?
Where you wear them in front?
Yeah.
We did that very little with my son because he's a tank and he was breaking our backs, and he's also like he's got a very unique personality. He likes affection, but he wants to be free to do his things.
Yeah.
He likes us close, but not like on him.
Okay. Yeah. Because sometimes when I see those babies and those little
they're twisted.
Uglies, they're twisted, and I just feel like, man, they're little, like they're almost like in the splits because the design of the little bungee part. I often wondered that, but
it's valid. It's valid because it's certainly an ingrained pattern.
Yeah.
That pelvic torque is really interesting. And in preparation for our conversation, one of the symptoms that I kept coming back to was thin stool. Thin stool, inability to dilate. And so it's like you think of it like Play-Doh. It's like they're pushing through that very thin opening. And I was like, wow. So these are the ways that people know that symptoms of that pelvic floor dysfunction. And then I came back to, well, what's the solution? Because if somebody's got a thin stool, I'm not sure that I want to be doing Kegel exercises with them.
No, that's actually the opposite. That's what we talked about earlier. They actually so there is we don't talk about urinary incontinence hardly ever. So there's no way we're going to have conversations about, fecal incontinence, but that is actually it's a pelvic floor. It's part of that whole functioning or not structure of the pelvic floor. And so for the sphincter to not be able to relax, it's the same thing as, not be holding and coughing and sneezing and having some urinary incontinence. So constipation, you're right. Thin stool, you're right. They're classic examples of pelvic floor dysfunction, yet the dots are not being connected. So we do need the manual release. Again, physiotherapy, if that's, if that is definitely a pathway. And that's also the reason that, I wanted to do something about these issues, because you can't really get a foam roller in between. I mean, you can straddle a foam roller, but you're probably going to get those sit bones in the way.
Yeah.
So that was, when I was thinking about what could I create from a fitness ease of use perspective where someone could, on their office chair, if they wanted to, do some of this work. And that's exactly what the impetus was for my product.
So tell me about it, but first tell me what a gooch is.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You guys, if Yoni ever releases the outtakes of this, we had such a great conversation leading up to going live. So I created a ball, and it's called the Gooch Ball for men and the Cooch Ball for women. And it's called that because the gooch, the area, is like what some guys would call the taint. Okay. The space between the anus and the scrotum. All right. Perineum. It has lots of names, from like funny, ha, snicker to like anatomical names, right? For women, it's the same, right? It's the perineum. It's the space between the vagina and the anus. And so I just called it where you put it, because I think if I can help one gooch or one cooch today, then I've had a very good day, right? And part of it is actually starting the conversation, because you guys, and I say this with so much love and respect, I sometimes will get a little bit of hate on social media, like you're being disrespectful to women with, calling it properly. And I'm not. Like, I'm a mom of 3, adult kids. I want to start the conversation because most of us are muted. And when we're muted, we cannot help, we cannot improve, we cannot inspire, we cannot empower. And so I've only had actually 2 people over the last 3 years not buy my product because of what it was named. They wanted a non-branded one, but it's the Gooch Ball for guys because you sit on it on your gooch. It's the Cooch Ball for women. You sit on it on your cooch, and what it does, okay, that's it. It's got a really cool layer of nylon thread inside of it, which makes it safe to use for your body. I don't want you sitting on your kid's dodgeball or your kid's little, floor hockey ball. I don't want you sitting on that.
What's
I
wrong
want you
with
to
sitting on those?
It's like the 3 bears, okay? If the porridge is too hot or the porridge is too cold, meaning if the structure is too hard or the structure is too soft, if it's too soft, you're not going to get any results. The too hard is where I really like to focus on, because we talked earlier, the sympathetic nervous system, it's going to turn on without us even realizing it. If you are sitting on something that is too hard, that feels unsafe or has the potential to hurt you, you don't realize it, but your alarm bells in your body are going off and you are actually holding more. Right?
Well, everybody can relate to that because everybody's gone in for a massage and the masseuse pushed too hard. And the result is you go, and you try and prevent them from getting in because it hurts so bad.
Yes.
I think everybody can relate to that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So that's why, through the educational, I have my videos are called the Cooch Confidence System for the girls. And then guys is called Gooch Power. And so when you watch your videos, you see that about 80% full is optimal.
Okay.
So that the weight of the body literally can melt onto the ball. The sympathetic nervous system doesn't freak out. Then when you start your diaphragmatic breathing, which is like a great big hug for the parasympathetic, is like, oh, this is safe. Oh, I'm not saying that there's not discomfort, because there is a direct relationship between what I call the ouch factor and sitting on your gooch ball and the health of your pelvic floor. Okay. So if you've got that rock wall and you sit on your gooch ball or your cooch ball, which is the same thing, they're co-branded. Okay. There's going to be some ouch factor there. Okay. And for some people, we want to work up to about a 3 minute. 3 minutes is this magical moment where a lot of the fascial tissue will start to release. You'll start to get oxygen-rich, nutrient-rich blood flow to the area. Mm-hmm. But a lot of my clients, men and women, will start with 15 seconds, or they'll start sitting on their bed where the mattress can take a bit of the brunt of the ball. They won't start on the floor. All right. And that's really what it is. It's a customized wellness tool. When you get off the ball, here's the beautiful thing about the body. The biofeedback you'll begin to experience is warmth, tingliness, which is all blood flow. I have some clients that don't feel that for 3, 6, 8 weeks because of how much hypertone they have. Mm-hmm. They have to really start to melt those tissues before the blood flow is allowed in. So that's the beautiful thing about this. It's foolproof. I tell people that it's also like brushing your teeth. If you brushed your teeth once a month, would you have great oral hygiene? Probably not. So if you think this is like a once a month or a once a week, it's the moments of the everyday. And breathing diaphragmatically. Did you know when you breathe diaphragmatically, you take in 600% more oxygen? Like, your cells have a party when they're properly oxygenated. That brain fog, that fatigue, that, where did I put my keys? Did I send that text? That starts to go away when you become properly oxygenated. Yeah. So all of these beautiful things are happening in these 3-minute moments each day. And, that's the simple magic behind the Gooch and Cooch Ball.
How many times a day do you recommend that people do it?
I like once a day. And
Okay.
I say to I say to my people, if you have more than that,
Yeah.
guess what? I would love for them then to like lay on their tummy, get this into their psoas. You can do lots of great digestive things. I do have some people that do it morning and night, but eventually there's those law of diminishing returns. If you have more time,
Yeah.
I'd
Do other
rather you lay on the TMJ and
stuff.
do a little bit of release there, or get on your butt and do some love for for your sciatic nerve. So, and all of these extras are part of the Cooch Confidence system, right? So it's not like a one-trick pony, because blood flow is our natural healing, system. And when there's a lack of it,
Sure.
or when it's stagnant,
Sure.
then what do we get? We get inflamed, and we know that inflammation is the precursor to disease. So it's like,
Yeah, you
just
can't bring nutrients to repair the area if there's no blood flow.
no,
So
exactly.
it's fascinating because it adheres directly to basic rehab principles and exercise principles with progression, where you're talking about starting some people off with as little as 15 seconds, and starting people off on a softer surface, like having them on the bed. Do you also influence factors like starting people off with less inflation of the ball when they're
Sure.
first?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yep.
you're getting
And
more
so
diffuse pressure as opposed to
exactly.
big pressure.
Exactly. And I should say, like, it's not unsafe if the ball is totally, because there's always going to be a little bit of tensegrity, right? There's always going to be a little bit of give in the ball. You're not sitting on, like a really big lacrosse ball that's plastic, that hard plastic, or it's just optimal when you can have your jaw relaxed, when you can be, breathing through. Your breath is your guide with this, right? As soon as your breath becomes erratic or it goes away, that's when your sympathetic is like calling in the troops to help out. So as long as you can, and that's where, I'll get people that will say to me, I can't meditate. But you don't realize that when you're focusing on your breath and feeling into your body, it can put you into a very relaxed and meditative state. So there's all these different layers that are being improved upon or nurtured in that short 3 minutes a day.
Hmm. And you mentioned earlier that you were working with, so typically when people think about pelvic floor dysfunction, I mean, my mind at least goes to women who have given birth. Men, as per usual, are kind of kicked to the side.
Yep.
But you mentioned that you were working with a football team on their
Yep.
pelvic floor functionality.
Yeah.
Who decided to bring you in to have you do that? I'm guessing that these are young guys.
Yeah, it was our local university football team back in Saskatoon, and we worked with them for about 6 years. I just, I actually, the head trainer was his son, and my son were on the same hockey team. And you know how you get to know the parents, and I brought him into the studio, showed him what we could do, and he's like, this would be perfect the day after we, our game days. I can take the offense to watch tape, and you can work with the defense. So that's what we did. And I brought these concepts to them. And you know what they started noticing? They
That's what
started
I wanted to
noticing,
know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They started noticing improvements, like the guys with the chronically tight hips, all of
Yeah.
a sudden they would, I'd see them the next week. They'd be like, Jana, like, I was actually able to up my weight this week in my squat because I had more range of motion. Or, out on the field when I was in, you get these big guys on the O-line that they're like, we could get way lower now, Jana, and get, our center. And that's what you want, right? That center of gravity low. And so it was really cool for these, 18 to 23-year-old guys to be like, how,
Yes.
how, and, and they were feeling it in the other aspects of their game. So that was my experience with them.
That's awesome. I love that you've created a simple at-home solution, talking 3 minutes a day, and you've created a program, it sounds like, that people get access to when they purchase the product. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so where can people find out more about you and about the Cooch and Gooch ball?
Gooch ball. Well, you know what I'm going to do, Yoni, for your community? I'm going to put together a special little package, and I'll get you the link. All right. And then you can share the link. So for this community, what I'm going to do is the Cooch and Gooch ball. So you can go to coochball.com, no problem, and get it. But if you get it through Yoni's link here, you're going to get the Cooch Ball and the Cooch Confident system for the women, the educational materials, the Gooch Power educational materials for the guys. And I'm also going to throw in, which you can't even get this one on my website. I'm going to put it in as a bonus. It's called the Cooch Fix Pack, or we call it the Fix Pack Mini. So the Fix Pack Mini is 3 half-hour sessions with me that teach you to go beyond the pelvic floor. One of the sessions is where you can use your ball for upper body wellness. So, tight lats, tingly arms. We do lots through the chest. We do a lot of release through the neck. Then there's one video that's all lower body. So knee issues. We work a little bit on the IT band. We work a little bit on cellulite. Cellulite, you guys, is fascial tissue that is puckered to the outermost layer of our skin. So if we can melt that fascia, then those fat cells that are frozen in there can be used as energy, and we can really change the look of our bodies. And then the third video on that in the Fix Pack is all about gut health. We use the ball through the ascending, the transverse, and the descending colon. So those of you that are dealing with chronic constipation, a lot bloating, just discomfort, gas, that's a really good sequence to learn. We'll get into the psoas. So that's what we'll do. That'll be the special link that you'll get here. We'll put that together, and there will be no cost on those 3 extra videos. We'll just throw it in as a bonus today.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you for making the time to come on and chat with me.
You're welcome. This has been fantastic.
To access the special offer that Jana is making exclusively for the Pain Fix Protocol community that includes the Cooch and Gooch Ball, the Cooch Confidence or Gooch Power Training System, and that bonus Fix Pack Mini, click the link in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. I'll also put links for that in the description down below this video. Beyond that, I just want to thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit that thumbs up button before you head out of here, and I'll see you next time.